Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just getting the slides ready and then we'll start shortly in a minute. Okay, so hope everybody is doing well. This is the first time that we're running an event online, and I am liking it very much. So maybe we'll be broadcasting more of our events online in the future. They'll also be recorded so that people can see them offline. I can see that there are a few people that have already attended, which is fantastic. There's a lot of material that I would like to cover today, so I'll get straight into it. So everybody already knows me. I'm Rami. I run the Wellington Power Platform user group with some other people in the community like AK and Eliza. Today we're going to talk about the migration to the unified interface. Now things have changed quite a lot over the last 48 hours. And I'll talk a little bit about what has changed recently. But there are two main messages that I would like to give everybody today. The first one, starting with, let's see if this is moving. All right. So the first one is that if you are unaware of when your instance is going to be upgraded to the unified interface, what I would suggest is you go right now to run1.powerapps.portals.com. So this is run1 and Power Apps with an S, portals with an S.com. And this is going to show you when your organization or your instance is likely to be upgraded. Now, even though the original date for the unified interface upgrade was set for the 1st of October, Microsoft might have sent you a message, especially for smaller organizations, informing them that your upgrade is going to happen earlier than that. And some of them have already happened in March, and some of them are scheduled for the mid-April. So if you are not certain when your unified interface upgrade will happen, I suggest you go there right now and have a look at the date. You can reschedule it, which is really good and gives you an option to do that. The second message that I want to give you today is this. If you have a large implementation, by now you should have a good understanding of what needs to be fixed. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in general for the unified interface and to make sure that everything is running smoothly, especially if you have a significant amount of customization that you need to run through. Later on in this presentation, I'm going to talk about all the different stages and what you need to do to address that. So quickly, I've got a short video in here that shows you sort of the different steps that you need to follow in terms of getting to the run1.powerappsportals.com. So as you can see, you can log in here, you can go to My Environment. Under My Environment, you will see the list of instances that you've got. So you click one of them. I've blurred those because they are set for a customer. As you can see, this customer is scheduled to be upgraded on the 17th of April. And now you can go in and then you can reschedule it to a later date. Now, let's start with some good news, bad news, good news sort of sandwich or burger if you want. From the one side, the unified interface is providing a significant amount of improvements to the user interface, to the performance, and to the capability that are provided part of the Power Platform as well as Dynamics 365. And we'll talk a little bit about those later on. From a bad news perspective is that once you have been upgraded to a pure unified interface only environment, the legacy web application will be removed and you will not have access to it anymore, which means that if you have issues, then you're stuck with your issues and you have to address them in the new unified interface. Now, another good news is that the original date was set for the 1st of October, and yesterday, James Phillips announced that it will be extended until the 1st of December. So there has been an announcement done by James Phillips himself in the sort of Microsoft blog saying that given the current circumstances, they are relaxing the deadline and now they've extended it by another 2 months up until the 1st of December. So the original timeline that we had, where we had the sort of wave 1 release that was going to be sort of most of the elements going GA in April. And then in October, they were looking at this wave 2 release on the 1st of October specifically, where everybody's going to be upgraded to the unified interface. This has been relaxed now and everything is sort of shifting by 2 months. In fact, some of the mandatory elements that were going to come out of the April 1st release have also been sort of slipped down up until June, including, for example, the reinforcement of the licensing that we were expecting on the 1st of April. Right, so as you're going through the migration, there are 4 steps that you have to take into consideration. The first one being initiate, so understand what is involved in the unified interface, what it is, and how you need to address it. Explore, as in start doing some upgrades or looking at pilot solutions, pilot apps that you use, that you migrate to the unified interface. Get a pilot user group within your organization that will test it and make sure everything is running nicely. And then as this is done, then you can actually do the transition, and there's a couple of paths that you can follow in there that we'll talk about shortly. And then finally, once we've done that transition, look at how you can optimize the usage of the unified interface by leveraging the latest capabilities that it provides. So for the rest of the presentation, I'll talk about all those 4 steps in details, starting with initiate. So in terms of initiate, you need to understand what you're dealing with. So what is the unified interface? And the description that I have is actually coming from Microsoft. So the unified interface is the new presentation client used across all applications in Dynamics 365 customer engagement. So in terms of all different channels or applications, if you want, we used to have the web channel, the Outlook channel, as well as the mobile channel. And historically speaking, each one of those had its own code base and its own user interface, was proved to be quite difficult for Microsoft to maintain. 3 different code bases. If there's a bug, they have to fix it in all 3 of them, and it proved to be quite costly to look after. So what they decided to do is to actually unify their interface, thus the name UI, Unified Interface, and bring all the 3 layers, web, app, as well as Outlook, to use the unified interface. Now, currently, the legacy web client is still available for the desktop users, but then eventually it's going to move, as we said, on the 1st of October, or if you decide to upgrade at an earlier stage. This will then provide a consistent experience across all the different devices. So whether you're using the web client, a tablet, a phone, or Outlook, you will have the same user interface. It will adapt based on the form factor that you have. So in fact, if you're currently using some aspects of the unified interface and you resize your window, you will notice that it will actually reflow nicely and then leverage the space that is available. So why the move to the unified interface from an organization perspective? So in that case, we're talking about a significant amount of improvements that Microsoft is providing. So you are actually optimizing your investment or maximizing your investment. There's a lot of value add that Microsoft has sort of included in the unified interface. And if you don't move to that, then you're leaving some value on the table that you're not leveraging actually. It's introducing a lot of exciting new user interface capabilities that are sort of part of that investment, but there are a lot of capabilities that are only available within the unified interface, which equates to a significant enhancement in productivity. Not to mention also another improvement in terms of performance in general. From Microsoft perspective, all the native apps, so those are the Dynamics 365 apps, have already been migrated to the unified interface or have an option of the unified interface. So that's sales, the customer service, marketing, field services, all of those have an equivalent in the unified interface. And also another important message to add, and that's coming from Microsoft, and I've experienced it over the last 2 years, a little bit more than 2 years, that they have absolutely no investment in the classic web UI. So a while back, I went back to them and I was saying that they had some issues with the classic UI, and they were not willing to address those because they don't invest in it anymore. Everything, all the power and energy is going to the unified interface. So as I mentioned, the unified interface has a number of improvements across the entire sort of platform. So we're talking about grids that are loading faster, forms that are loading faster, dashboards that are also faster. The quick load is reacting faster. And also from a mobile perspective, they've also done some improvement in that space. So we can see significant improvement across the board. Now, in the next section, I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences between the classic and the unified interface. So the next few slides, you will notice that the unified interface is on the left-hand side and the legacy web app is on the right-hand side. And I'll sort of point out some nuances between them. Generally speaking, you will still find your way around, but do not underestimate the amount of change management that is required to get people on board to understand where things have moved to. I know when I first looked at it, it took me a little bit of time to actually realize that, you know, the navigation is now there and the admin center is now there, and now we're doing things slightly differently. Also to identify all the new quirks that have been introduced, all the new features that have been introduced to improve productivity. So those will have to be users will have to be retrained. And also if you've got some documentation, you'll need to look at improving that documentation as well, or updating it. So from a navigation perspective, now the navigation is always present and it's on the left-hand side rather than on the top. So they got away from sort of the tiles and moved it into sort of a left navigation, sort of reminiscent of CRM4 or the older versions that we had. So we will see some themes that are coming back. In terms of structure, yes, it does look different, but it is sort of similar in terms of layout. So you still have sort of your areas that we are used to. Those are number 3s basically. So at the bottom of on the left-hand side unified interface, at the bottom, you will notice there are those 2 arrows pointing out and up and down. When you click on them, you will see the different areas that you've configured, and part of each area you will have a group, and part of each group you will have a collection of items. The top navigation looks slightly sleeker with less sort of color changes. So they've worked a little bit on that. Not a big difference in that space. From a dashboard's perspective, now they're leveraging the full size of the screen, as well as made some significant improvement to the charts, which talk about in a second. From a grid perspective, it looks cleaner, denser. So they've worked a little bit on the headers, made them a little bit more sort of integrated within the whole UI, and also smaller font and a little bit less spacing or wasted sort of real estate, if you want, in between the different rows. The forms as well have seen quite a few changes, but again, generally speaking, the layout has had a facelift. So it looks fresher, and they've removed some of the unnecessary colors and the blank spaces. But one of the most significant one is around the tabs. So we moved away from having the tabs as just different sort of areas within the same form where you can scroll up and down to minimize scrolling, and turns them back into the traditional tabs that we used to see in previous versions of Dynamics or of CRM specifically, like CRM4. That does have an impact on the way you do your coding. So there is a chance, and this is a general theme, that as you're migrating to the unified interface, some of the specific JavaScripts will fail and stop working because of all of those changes. And at the end of the day, the unified interface is a change to the front end. So you need to make sure that whatever customization you did to the front end, hopefully all of it supported, but whatever you did using JavaScript is still functioning nicely. Some improvements on the timeline, they've made them denser, easier to identify what they are, and sort of prettier to look at, and they've consolidated them all part of the same view. They removed some of the tabs. We've got sort of, previously you had the all posts, the auto post, the users, and then within that you had the post, you had the assistants, you had the activities, you have the notes. All of that is now part of the same view. But in order to actually get to what you want, sort of you will notice that right above, sort of on the, there's a little funnel, and that little funnel in here will allow you to filter the information that you want based on some criteria that you enter in there. Some changes made to the business process flow. So they've made it a little bit slicker. And when you click on it, it doesn't expand and take a lot of space part of your screen, but instead it has a flyout sort of form or subform or dialogue that you can type in the information that you need in there. And then if you click on the pin bit, then you can sort of pin it on the right-hand side. So it doesn't take part of your sort of vertical real estate, but it takes some space from a horizontal real estate, which most monitors being widescreen flows better in terms of sort of less scrolling that is required. So we did a comparison between the legacy and the unified interface, and as you can see, it's mainly a facelift, a bit of juggling things around and changing them. But on top of that, there's a lot of new functionality that is introduced in the unified interface, and some of it is related to the Power Apps Component Framework (PCF) custom controls that have been implemented. Be sort of an element on the form or a data set, like a list of things that you're displaying in a custom way. So they've introduced, for example, a new calendar view where you can drag and drop and create your own appointments. The dashboards themselves are now interactive a la Power BI. So as you can see in this short video in here, as you click from one element to the other, it's going to automatically filter the rest of the information that you have on your dashboard. One feature that I really liked is sort of listing or a mini view, if you want, of your elements. So if you're looking at a list, the list of records that you've got, or if you're looking at a one-to-many, so sort of a relationship between a record and the many records associated with them, you can sort of open that little dialogue on the left-hand side that will show you all of that list of the records that are related or of the records that are in a view. And you can navigate between them just by clicking on them, going up and down. So for example, if you've got an organization with a list of contacts associated with it, you can click on that related view and then you can see them on the left-hand side. You can go through the contacts associated with that organization one by one. You can just go down, update them, for example, or just read information about them, which makes it quite nice feature to have. From a list view perspective, they made them a little bit denser. So that's in line with all the changes that they've made for the mobile apps as well as Outlook. So it will adapt based on the space that you've got in there. And as I mentioned, the Power Apps component framework, there's a lot of really good components that you can add in there. Some of them are official by Microsoft, the ones that are sort of rolling in there, but then there's a significant amount that is implemented by the community that are quite nice components that you can add onto your screens to sort of display the information in a more convenient way and in a custom way. If you're interested in that, there's the pcf.gallery, I believe, list of sort of community contributed Power Apps controls that you can have a look at. Cool. So now that we've done sort of the initiation, the next bit is to explore how is it going to behave in terms of upgrade and what we need to do. So how to start? Well, Microsoft has recommended sort of a little bit of a journey. And the first one is just start. Just go there and then switch to the unified interface, have a look at your forms, have a look at what's working, what's not, and then just assess and then start sort of explore what are the things that you need to do, you know, in terms of do some regression testing, assess whether there are any changes that you need to do from a JavaScript perspective. And I am saying JavaScript, but out of experience and doing a few upgrades as well, I've noticed that even plugins sometimes might get affected, mainly because the sort of classic interface had a weird way of working, and now they've enforced a lot of strict rules that don't work with some of the ways we used to configure plugins. So don't think that it's only for the front end. Mainly it is, but also have a look at whether your plugins are firing correctly in the right order with the right information. Do a little bit of regression testing to make sure everything is working fine. Another thing to look into is if you've used some customization, such as the ribbon editor, where you've introduced some custom buttons and all of that. All of those need to be reviewed as well to make sure that they are working as expected. So once you have a good understanding of where you are, then do a pilot. Get a collection of users, get them to try it and see if, you know, what their feedback is, what needs to be improved, whether they have any concerns. And then once you iron those out, then plan how you're going to roll that out to the rest of the organization, and then rinse and repeat. Just carry on doing that until the entire instance is migrated to the unified interface. So there's a couple of ways that you can switch between them. You can use in the URL, you will notice that sometimes if you're using the unified interface, it will say force UCI equals 1. You can add that as well, just to have a look at your form in the unified interface, or vice versa. If you actually have force UCI and you want to have a look at your form in classic, then you can do force classic equals 1 in the URL, replacing the force UCI equals 1. And that will behave and then roll back. Now remember, once you have been upgraded, this option will not be available anymore. And if you're happy with the way it is working, you can actually go into your settings and set the unified to use the unified interface only. So this is sort of a quick video. You go to the admin.powerplatform.com or .microsoft.com. You go to your environment, your admin area, to the behavior, and then you can use unified interface only. Save that, and that will block others from actually using the classic interface. Now that you've identified what you need to do, you need to decide on a path on how you're going to sort of tackle that problem. So you've got your current apps that might be running on the Power Platform. The two options, and there's a third one as well, is to actually look at, okay, running some apps in parallel. So I'm going to select whatever app is running in Classic and then run one in parallel, just using the unified interface. Or you can get a new group of users and you can give them a new pilot app. And you say, all right, well, we're trying something new. This is something that is not currently available in the previous apps. We're sort of tidying up what we have for a pilot group. We'll give them that app and then they'll try it. The third one that is not displayed on the screen in here is actually if you're doing a migration from on-premise to online, the recommendation is don't even think about classic interface because it's a wasted investment that was only going to last for a couple of months or a few more months. So if you're doing an on-premise to online, go straight to the unified interface, especially if you're in older versions of Dynamics. Currently, I think they support a migration from all the way back from CRM 2011, which is the current supported version, all the way to CRM currently version 9, which is the latest online one. So let's have a look at the two options, parallel app and pilot app. So in the case of a parallel app, you sort of go in and create sort of a parallel app similar to the one that you have with the existing capabilities. So in order to do that, you go into your make.power apps, you go into your solution. Now keep in mind that all those sort of custom apps that we are creating are solution aware. So you go there, you create a model-driven app, and then you customize it. So you can give it a name, you can give it a unique URL, so probably that's in the next slide. So you give it a name, that will automatically populate a URL for it. You can give it a picture as well so that people can identify it. And once this is done, then you can start configuring it. You can start the configuration from a solution. So as you can see in here, we've selected the solution and solution sitemap. You click on done, and then it comes up with whatever was in the solution to be sort of your starting point. So once that you've got that, you work on your sitemap, you make sure that it displays the information that you need, where you need them in the right order as well. And then you can actually go into all the specific views, the entities, the forms, and then select which ones to display and which ones to hide. Once you're done with that, then you can basically validate, make sure everything is okay. Warnings are usually okay, but it's better to sort of eliminate all the warning messages, and then you can publish it and make it available to people. Especially if you're using a pilot app, make sure that you limit who has access to it. So you can go into your app and you can say share. And when you share, it will give you the option to share it with individual users or with a list of security roles. So basically, if you have a security role with that name, then you will have access to that pilot. The recommendation for Microsoft, if you have several apps, is to limit the number of apps that are available per user. So, and simply because you don't want to confuse them where they have overlapping functionality and they wouldn't know where to do it. But that's, you know, that needs to be assessed on a case-by-case basis for the different organizations. Right, if you're going down the path of the pilot app, then what you need to do is sort of to initiate a conversation and figure out who the user group is going to be that will be using that app. Design it so that it's fit for purpose and it has all the information that is required. Implement it, so just build it as we demonstrated before, deploy it, and then get some feedback from your users. Once you're done with that, then you repeat the process to sort of gather the feedback, improve that pilot app and work on it until you get the result that you want, and then you gradually start transitioning to the rest of the apps that are available. Cool. In terms of transition, so this is the actual doing of the work. So what you need to start by doing is they recommend is a business assessment. And by this business assessment, they mean understand what your current state is from a business perspective and see how you're going to implement those new apps. So typically, as you're going through an upgrade, you might do a tidy up at the same time. So you have a look at how we've implemented Dynamics. Is it still relevant today to the way it was built a while back? Most of the time, there will be some entities that are not used anymore or have been repurposed, renamed. Now is a good time to actually reassess how you're doing your business and to check whether the implementation is fit for purpose and whether you actually need to address any of the elements in there. Once you have that vision on how you're going to do it, select a transition path. So do you want to do it in parallel, or do you want to do it as a pilot? You can even think of, do you want to do it app per app, or do you want to do it as a big bang? And each one of them has advantages and disadvantages, which we're going to talk about in the next couple of slides. Prepare a plan on what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, when is development due to end, when is user acceptance need to take place. So this is project management 101. When are you going to get sign off? When is change management going to kick in? When are you going to start training your people to actually start using it, and when you're going to roll it out? And then part of that, you will determine what is your sort of value proposition and what you're getting out of it, and then execute the plan. So as I mentioned, you need to select a path. Let's talk about the different paths. So the first one is to select a target app. So you're going to say, all right, we've got one target app or maybe a couple that we're going to start with and run things in parallel. So some people will be migrated to the unified interface, others will remain on the classic until we finish with the first group, and then we gradually start rolling the others in. And you would do that to sort of minimize the impact on transition. You don't want mayhem and chaos and everybody being sort of concerned and stressed about it. You also need to have a look at the possibility of selecting a smaller group as the first target app, and that way you get sort of less sort of interference with their day-to-day lives. And then once you iron out all the issues, then you start looking at more challenging groups or larger groups, and then you implement that gradually. Now, it does have advantages as well as disadvantages. So we're talking about maintaining two user interfaces at the same time, having to run that those iterations for several apps at the same time. So it might be a little bit challenging, especially if you have things in common. So let's say you've got a JavaScript that is used in a form that has been upgraded to the unified interface, and the same JavaScript used for a form that is still using the legacy web client. And now you fixed the bug specifically for the unified interface and you've broken it in the classic. So having those two running in parallel could be challenging, but if you can segregate them, then that's a good way to go in terms of minimizing impact to your business. Obviously, the second option is to go full transition. So we're going full on big bang. Again, more work up front, probably a little bit more difficult to challenge because everybody's going to be moved at the same time. But then some of the drawbacks that are on the per app might be lifted in terms of not having to deal with two interfaces at the same time, and then making sure that you've got one big message from a change management perspective. Everybody gets trained, everybody's on the same boat. The last one that I've mentioned is the on-premise to online. So this is where we strongly recommend you go straight to the unified interface, and then you have a look at sort of how can you tidy up things to be sort of leveraging the unified interface capabilities. In terms of pre-planning, there's a nice checklist in here that will tell you what are the different steps that you need to follow. At the top of it is to run the Power App Solution Checker. I think I might have a quick demo on that. So basically what you want to do is make sure that the instances that you've got are all running as expected. So the solution checker will check the JavaScript, will check the plugins, will give you recommendations on the forms that you've got, will tell you whether you've got anything that is sort of not supported or deprecated that needs to be changed or that will not work. So it gives you a nice report on all the different things that will happen. If you are using ISVs or third-party components, do check that they will work with a unified interface. Some of them, especially the older ones that are not supported, will not be moved to unified interface. So you'll need to find out either an alternative or contact the organization that built that ISV and check whether they have a newer version that will be compatible with the unified interface. Do a lot of testing, so do the as is. So as you switch it to the unified interface, check what is broken, what is working, and then address those. As I mentioned, look at deprecated APIs that need to be changed and sort of fix the code behind it. Look at the custom controls that you've built. So if you've got some custom web resources using HTML, for example, or any framework, just make sure those are still working and not sort of depending on deprecated APIs. So introduce all of that within your ALM so that you can have sort of a smooth way of deploying your solutions and getting feedback from the users as you go through your configuration and your changes. Make sure that, you know, as I mentioned before, that the user experience is fit for purpose for your business today, and then get that feedback from the customers and carry on refining with time. Regression testing, user acceptance testing, go live. So this is all the typical things that we do. And then sort of what we have in here is the optional step is to make sure that you're leveraging the latest and the greatest of the unified interface by introducing new features, if you have the luxury to do that without confusing your users too much. And then carry on doing that work until you get it right. So this is a sort of a quick overview of the solution checker. So you go to make.powerapps.com, you select your solution in there, and then you've got, once you select it, there's a little drop down at the top that says solution checker. You can run it in there. It takes a little bit of time. And then once it's done, that you can either download the results, or you can actually go and view the results online. So if you download it, there's a nice Excel spreadsheet that will show you sort of a chart of where your issues are, and then sort of a list of all the different known issues if you want. Cool. From an ALM perspective, we sort of briefly touched on that. So make sure you create your apps in there. They are solution aware. Add them into your solution. Microsoft recommendation is to use managed solutions, especially if you're doing sort of clean a clean slate, or if you have the luxury to do it, go managed, unless sort of you're finding it really challenging to go unmanaged. And then introduce all of that within your ALM, your application lifecycle management, so that you can automate the deployments and so on. In terms of sort of testing, do consider using Easy Repro. So Easy Repro is a sort of open source framework that is built on top of Selenium automated UI testing that is actually implemented by Microsoft with contribution from different people in the community that will help you automatically test your solution. Now, this is a code-driven test, sort of unit test if you want, but it's quite powerful. And if you know that there are bits that are maybe problematic or that require a little bit of attention or are challenging, just consider using Easy Repro to do a sort of front-end user interface automated testing, and keep running that constantly. As you're making changes to your JavaScript, make sure you're not breaking anything else. And all of that can sort of be integrated within your Azure DevOps pipeline. A bit of sort of tips on what you can do. We briefly touched on that when we're talking about apps. So make sure that you have the right information that you need, part of your sort of model-driven apps, in terms of entities, in terms of views, in terms of forms, business process flow. So you can be selective over what is displayed in there. Give your app a nice URL. And as I mentioned before, trying to limit the number of apps for a single user, not to confuse them. In terms of navigation, optimize it using the areas, the groups, and the sub areas and the groups. Just make sure that it's relevant to the user that is logged in. Now, keep in mind that you can have a more general app and then use security roles to lock down some areas that will not display. So that's also an option in terms of making it work. And the last one is more of a recommendation. Make it look pretty. You know, don't keep blank icons in there. Now icons have moved. They're not using PNG anymore. They're using SVG. So now is a good time to sort of make sure that you've got consistent items. And there are tons of free icons that you can get online. You can just search for it on Google, and you'll find lots of relevant ones. From a user experience cheat sheet perspective, sort of try to leverage the latest and greatest of the unified interface. Optimize your forms, your views, your dashboards, just so that they can sort of work better with your current state of your business. Clean up the metadata. So if you have elements that you don't need, consider either deleting them or just sort of at least hiding them from the search capabilities, so they're not in anyone's face all the time when they're not relevant, and leverage the latest help capabilities that come with the user interface to improve sort of user adoption. From a change management perspective, set clear expectations on sort of what is going to be deployed. Make sure there are lots of comms, people are trained. As I mentioned, given that the interface is going to look different, update your training documentation. Make sure that it's using the latest screenshots, and that you know, if people need to refer to it, they don't get confused where things don't look the same. And then train your users, give them a good understanding of what has changed, where things are at, and what they would expect when they log in, and then they are sort of introduced to the unified interface. Have a support sort of group. So level 1 support is usually let them be sure that they are aware of those changes and some of the challenges that might come in. Otherwise, have a group of champions that could be part of the sort of original pilot group that have understood what the changes are, understand some of the challenges, and then get them to sort of support the rest of the people. In terms of of course, in the Kiwi culture, don't forget to celebrate your success. I just received a message from Arpit, just a question in there, so I'll answer that towards the end. Cool. So the next step is actually to have a look at the optimization. So now that we've sort of submitted, done the release, people are using it, we can start looking at what else we can do part of the unified interface. So in this instance, we are looking at measuring the success, reviewing what we have done, planning for what are we going to do next, and then do a release. So have KPIs in terms of, are people using it? Are they spending their time efficiently? Is there anything that can be automated, anything that can be improved in terms of layout and so on? And then start sort of drilling further into each one of those, review the changes you can do, plan them. If you're doing agile, this is the perfect opportunity to actually prioritize them in terms of what is sort of high value and sort of a low-hanging fruit that we can address straight away, and what is high value but may take some time, but actually having it in there is really important. So you can use like a Kanban board or just a priority list to prioritize your work and then introduce it in the next release. Leverage sort of the latest and the greatest that you've got in your solution so that you can, or a part of the unified interface so that you can improve productivity. In terms of actually getting the KPIs or some metrics about what can be used, then there is some insight application analytics that can give you information about who's using it, how often they're using it, what are the browsers or the devices that they're using to actually sort of access it. And as you can see, those are out-of-the-box dashboards that are available part of your admin center, the Power Platform admin center, and they give you a good sort of view of where everything is at. You can create your own charts and dashboards and Power BI report, especially if the data is not necessarily related to the way the platform is being used, but rather to the data that is being entered and the business itself. So the transactional data, as opposed to just the general telemetry of the platform. All of those will be quite useful sort of feedback that you can then gather and then start refining your application. So all in all, we went through all the different stages in terms of looking at how you can sort of start initiating, understanding what the unified interface is, exploring what is working, what is not, going through the transition, and then optimizing it at the end. This sort of talk is a little bit high level, but the main purpose of that is to actually just give everybody awareness about the dates when it's due. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the original date was set for the 1st of October, whereas now it has been loosened a little bit and then moved to the 1st of December, or the December in general, as James Phillips mentioned it. Whether there will be additional delays in the future, maybe. We're sort of living in sort of an uncertain time right now. So we'll see, we'll keep you posted if anything changes. But most importantly, if you don't know when it's scheduled to be upgraded, go right now and have a look at when it's scheduled to be implemented, and delay it if you can. So as I said, some of them have been scheduled for April, and some customers don't know that they have been scheduled for April, and those things need to be sort of delayed. They will allow you to delay it, I think, once. If you want to delay it again, then you might need to open a support ticket. If you don't have it in your immediate plan, I would suggest to delay it as far as possible and then take your time to get ready. and then address that. If you leave it too late to delay, so we're talking about maybe days or even a week before it's actually due to be delayed, then it might be a little bit more difficult to delay it, as Microsoft would have lined up all the prep work to get it to that point. In that case, you might have to open a support ticket to get it upgraded or to get it delayed to a later date. And yeah, so it's start as soon as you can. Start understanding the magnitude of the problem. If it's small implementation, most likely there'll be some minor changes. If it's something a little bit larger, then definitely you need to have a plan by now on what are the things that need to be addressed, because it's a project by itself. Some organizations are offering support to their customers. So for example, at DXC, we're providing a 2 free-hour assessment so that we can have a look at our customers' environment and understand what the status is, and then we'll give them a more accurate estimate on the work that needs to be done. And it could be that, you know, we switch it, it works, or it could be that, you know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and this is how we're going to phase it. So there's a few resources that I would like to share as well. There is a lot of them in here. I will upload those slides and make them available through Meetup. AK and I are working on having teams so that we can host some of that information in there, especially the events moving forward. This has been sort of, as our first experience, I find it a little bit strange to be sort of one-way conversation. So other than the few Q&As that I'm receiving on the screen and here, there's no interaction where people might sort of go off mute and then ask a question, which I usually encourage. So AK and I are working on a way to actually make it a little bit more interactive by adding the users or the invitees as guests into our team tenancy. So stay posted around that. So around resources that you can have a look at, part of the community.dynamics.com. So there's a unified interface specific sort of area where there are lots of forums, information about what are the things that are changing, challenges that people are facing, and how to address them. A list of deprecations are identified in those URLs in there. There's a unified interface white paper that might be of interest if you want to get your head around it and understand a little bit more about it. There's also sort of a lot of the slides that I've got in my presentation today were based on the fast track technical talks. So there's what they call the playbooks. So you can go and have a look at those playbooks. There's each one of the stages that I talked about is a separate talk. So there are 4 talks in total, an introduction and for the 4 different stages. As I said, the top one priority when you're starting the transition is to run the solution checker. So there's some documentation in there on how to run it. You can even run solution checker out of PowerShell. And when you do that, you'll actually be able to automate that part of your DevOps pipeline. There's a few updates as well. Easy Repro, there's a link in there on how to get started, and then some information about the Azure DevOps. That brings me to the end of my presentation. So again, new experience doing all of that online. I think it's other than the lack of interaction, we did go faster than the usual. So we're at 50 minutes, which is convenient for me because I'll have to jump to another call, another presentation that I'm doing for another user group in Australia in 10 minutes. But let's have a look at the questions. So the one that we've got is, do you recommend using fake XRM Easy or for UI testing at all, or Easy Repro is MS recommended way? 2 different things. Fake XRM Easy is more on the sort of code level perspective. Easy Repro is more on the unified interface. I tend to use both at the same time. And I'll give you an example. So we were just building some new capability for one of our customers, and we've realized that doing a pure unit test using fake XRM Easy has proved challenging because there was a lot of JavaScript specific logic on the front end that stops the user from sort of progressing or stop the creation of specific records using a pure code perspective. So what I ended up doing is I mixed and matched both of them. So I start by creating my record using Easy Repro, which is pure user interface, and it triggers all the JavaScript correctly. And once I get it into the state that I want, then I switch into the fixed XLRM Easy, and then I start sort of using a proper unit test to feed this information into my context, a fake context, and then run the examples that I need. So you can use both. Specifically, if you are considering sort of regression testing, and then make sure that some of the functionality that you're changing works in your code, as well as some of the functionality is working on the front end, then yeah, just using a combination of both is all good. Easy Repro is the one that is recommended by Microsoft. It is sort of going strong and it getting constant updates. And as an example, I am personally in touch with the people that built Easy Repro because they, as the platform is moving and introducing new capabilities, for example, part of the April release, we're going to get model dialogues, and those don't have an Easy Repro library at the moment. So I'm working with them to actually introduce that library, as well as looking at some enhancements related to quick create and unified interface and so on. So it is an active project. You know, feel free to use it, but again, it depends on your case. You can use one or the other, or a hybrid approach. We've got a new question in there, or actually it's just someone saying, thank you for the presentation. And yes, I will be uploading the PowerPoints, and I'll put a link to them on Meetup. If I don't, I know AK is on the call. Just remind me and I'll do it. Any more questions? Going once, going twice. All right, so we've got 10 minutes to spare. So thank you everybody for joining. Feel free to give me some feedback on what worked and what didn't work part of this presentation. And then hopeful to see you next time if we can in person, but most likely for the foreseeable future, we'll have our next sessions run online. Thank you all for joining.